Welcome, everybody, to this week's roundtable or Peace Roundtable, which unfortunately, for those who are just listening on YouTube, they may not know Francesca unfortunately got sick. She won't be able to join us, but Francesca Donato will be here in our future roundtable session. That being said, we still have some incredible speakers today and some very important topics that are of a historical significance. I, personally speaking, did not anticipate this type of world historic process to be something I would live through and see with my own eyes. And I didn't think it would take the character that we are now seeing with the battle lines so clearly shaped between two different outlooks about the future, maybe more, but two very incompatible outlooks about what type of future we would bring into the world for our grandchildren and those to come after. This system is going through some incredible ruptures, and I think we all watched over the past 48 hours the recordings of Zelensky being slapped with a lot of reality for the first time, I think, in the last 3 years. We actually saw reality present itself and force itself onto the illusions of this terrible comedian who ended up talking out of line in the White House and ended up not even having to be kicked out before even having the luncheon with President Trump and company. There obviously are a lot of new openings for peace and dialogue that we're now seeing between the USA and Russia, which is putting a lot of technocrats into a crisis. And Ed asked me to showcase on this anniversary not only of the third year of the war in Ukraine, but also the third year of our drawing of a certain cartoon. So Ed and I in 2022 teamed up with my cartooning skills and Ed's comedic imagination to put together a little cartoon. And Ed, what newspaper was this published in Russia? I don't even know.
It's a largest tabloid with several million readers, and this was 22. I think August 22. So you see some faces now who are now out of the picture, including Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. So maybe we need some updates. But the reason I asked Matt to show this is that there was a voice, a screaming voice, that from no one else but EU Foreign Policy Commissioner Ayakali, that Trump is no longer leader of the free world. We need a new leader. And this picture comes perfectly timely. This is new leader, pants down. And this is chorus of European leaders who was just singing that you see what they're singing. So it's a very symbolic cartoon, but again, it needs some update. Anyway, today our show moved from Washington to London. And I believe we have some people from London. Maybe they will give us some update, what they see from the ground. Excuse me. Oh, he's come. Just a second. It's phone.
Okay.
Come. Are you on? Okay, keep trying. Okay. Okay.
So
Come.
you will join us?
Computer problem. He's trying to connect, so hopefully he will solve this problem. Anyway, let me just turn off. I will not be interrupted anymore. So we moved to Europe, and we sent in advance of this, we sent Matt to Europe. So you see, he's in this hotel in Rome. So he's on the ground. No. So let's hear some voices from Europe. Because now it's your show. I think at least for now, US is out and Europe is in. We saw the embrace, how Zelensky flew to London. He didn't have lunch in Washington, so he went to London. Maybe London will give him some lunch or whatever. I think he also will meet King. So maybe we can add King to this next cartoon. without no offense, of course, because this is what King wants. He should be part of this. So, look, okay, so with Matt from Rome and me from Washington, the voice is now to Europeans. Let's, Matt, please introduce our European guests.
Well, certainly, yeah. And for the first European guest that we have here is a longtime friend from the UK column, the host of an excellent uh, podcast that features on a multiple basis every week on UK column. Mike Robinson, he's the editor also, and has been there on the front lines in the UK for a number of years, talking truth where other people are afraid to tread. And Mike has agreed to share his considerations about the dynamics, the ruptures facing Europe right now, with the U.S. pulling out potentially of its commitments towards using Ukraine as a proxy towards a war with Russia, and what is this? Just what is your take on what's going on right now, Mike? I know you've got a very good full spectrum view of things. What does it look like from your end? And you're on mute right now, so you have to unmute your camera or your mic. On the bottom left-hand side, there's a little icon that looks like a microphone, and it says mute or unmute. Oh, there we go. I think you got it. You got it.
Okay. Okay. Right. Good. Okay. Well, look, I'm going to start off. I'm going to say I'm not quite so optimistic that what we're actually witnessing, unfortunately, is a move towards peace on the part of Trump. And I'll explain why I think that now. This furor that we've seen between Trump, the UK, and the EU in the last few days, with Zelensky involved with this open spat on mainstream media and so on. Is part, I believe, of a process that's been on for quite a long time now. But in terms of this story from Trump that the EU needs to start paying for its own defense, this is something he's been talking about since well before he was ever president. But he brought it to the table, I suppose, first in 2017 when he went to Brussels to open the new NATO headquarters there. And I don't know if anybody remembers that, but he was standing there at that inauguration of the new headquarters with the big piece of the World Trade Center that was being there as a sort of monument to NATO and so on, because that was the time that Article 5 was invoked. So at that, the EU leaders were all lined up like naughty school children at the day, stood in a row, but they sort of laughed as Trump told them off for not spending enough on defense at that time. And so even before his election this time around, during the election campaign, we were already starting to see the rhetoric build, the pressure build amongst EU leaders, the fear build amongst EU leaders, or at least being presented to them in the media, of the implications of a Trump presidency. So they were absolutely being wound up to understand the implications of that. And so let's just look at a little bit of the history of EU Defence Union, because this is a key part of what we're seeing at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. And so maybe I could start off by answering what that term means, what EU Defence Union is. So in case anybody doesn't know, I'm sure everybody does, but the EU is a political union of 27 member states. But alongside that political union, we have, for example, sub-unions, for example, the banking union, that established the European Central Bank, the monetary union, which established the euro as a currency, and so on. And with each of these unions comes a loss of sovereignty for the member state that is a member of the EU. And so the idea of a defence union is just another one of these sort of sub-unions that has been mooted for many, many decades, in fact. And in fact, I think the first time that term was used, originally proposed, was 1984, when Jacques Delors mentioned it at a summit of the European Economic Community, as it was known in those days. And this was an EEC meeting of heads of government. It took place in Fontainebleau. And it was during that summit that Margaret Thatcher used her famous "no, no, no" phrase for the first time. This was in private. She hadn't done it in public yet because it was a private meeting. But in this case, she was referring to defence union, monetary union, and the abolition of the vetoes that member states had. Those were the three no's. So she refused defence union at that stage. But the time we get to John Major in 1991, the foundations of a defence union were laid. Basically, the common foreign and security policy was created. There was the beginnings of a common defence policy, and these, in fact, ended up being part of what was described as the second pillar of the Treaty of Maastricht. And then in 1998, Tony Blair and Jacques Chirac, who was the French president at that time, signed the Saint-Malo Declaration, and this effectively made the Franco-British axis the main driver of the EU's common security and defence policy. And this is a key point. Despite, post-Thatcher, Britain has been a key driver of the defence union policy in the EU. It really started taking off following Blair's premiership here. Now, the common foreign and security policy was agreed then in 1999, and in 2004 the European Defence Agency was established, and then in 2009 we saw the setting up of what they called SAFE, which was the Synchronized Armed Forces Europe. And then in 2015, we really started to see it gaining traction within the European Commission because Jean-Claude Juncker, who was president of the European Commission at the time, began calling for an EU army. And we started seeing the repetition of this term EU army by multiple people since then. But one of the German newspapers he was speaking to at the time, and he was saying necessary for a European army to be established, a common army amongst Europeans would convey to Russia that we're serious about defending the values of the European Union. So even back then, Russia was, for already quite some time, Russia had been the sort of target of this. Michel Barnier, who was the defense advisor for Juncker, he produced a white paper then in that same year. I can't remember what it was called. It was published by the European Political Strategy Centre, and it was calling for military union, as they described it at the time. And then in 2016, the EU and NATO signed a joint declaration on EU-NATO cooperation. And so it's gone since then with multiple events, the permanent structured cooperation, the various mechanisms they have in place so that there's no restrictions on the moving of military personnel and material from one member state, from the west coast of the European Union right to Ukraine, effectively, and various other agreements have been put in place. But what we need to understand is that this has never been about getting rid of NATO. This is about 27 member states of the EU ceding sovereignty over their national militaries to the European Commission, effectively. And so if we look at NATO at the moment, there's 23 of the 27 EU member states are also members of NATO. And so what would happen once EU Defence Union was established is that instead of having a NATO membership of 32 nations, it would have a membership of 10 nations, with the European Commission effectively replacing the 23 EU member states within NATO. So this is something that both the EU and NATO have been working hard for all these years, and in fact, for many years, Jens Stoltenberg and the then, she called herself, the post is called, oh good grief, actually it's completely fallen out of my head, but anyway, it's effectively the EU Foreign Minister, Special Representative is what they call themselves. So in those days it was Federica Mogherini, an Italian, and she and Jens Stoltenberg were barely out of each other's company for years until she was replaced. in fact, at that time, they published a diagram of what the European Defence Union might look like, which they imagined a bit like, a sort of building with a bunch of pillars in front of it. And NATO was the right-hand pillar. It was the main one of the main pillars that kept the roof up. So, NATO is not being abandoned by this. But the problem for the EU is, and it's always been, the recognition by member states, as I mentioned a minute ago, of the implications of defence union, and this is probably the final sort of area of sovereignty that would be getting handed over to the EU at this point, and that's one removal of sovereignty too far for most EU members. And so as much as the European Commission has been trying to drive defence union forward, they've had some really major pushback from member states. And one example is that, just to give one example, is Ursula von der Leyen, around the time she became the president of the European Commission for her first term, was talking about standing up.
Sorry to interrupt. It's great history, but we are talking about today.
I'll explain. You'll understand why I'm coming onto this, why I'm describing this history in a second. So just give me a second, and I'll get to the point. She was talking about standing up a single command and control structure based in Brussels, which manages both civilian and military assets. So in other words, the military and the police. And she was talking about, as I say, just about the time she was becoming president. But command and control is only one part of this defence union. The other part is single point procurement. And so there would be a single EU defence budget, with the aim being to build an EU-based military industrial complex similar to the United States. And of course, that for many people is pie in the sky idea, but in reality, that would mean that it's simply a much easier job for the US military industrial complex to effectively bribe their way into bigger defence contracts, because they have the European Commission to deal with and not the individual member states. So those are the two main areas that they're looking at. So but because of the sovereignty issue, defence union has never gotten over the line, and that's until now, because Trump, as we've seen in the last few weeks, has absolutely doubled down on his 2017 position that the EU needs to get on with it. They need to be spending, he says, 5% of their GDP on defence. And in fact, Poland, I think, is the only EU member state at the moment which is spending 5%. In order to try to take a little bit of the heat off this, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, announced a few days ago that Britain would be upping its defence budget to 2.5%. We currently spend 2.3% of GDP, but even that's a bit fake because that includes pensions, actually. So this isn't quite what it seems. But he said 2.5% within the next couple of years, and by the next Parliament, it would be 3%. But then, obviously, in the last 48 hours, we've seen Trump openly fighting with Zelensky. And I'm arguing that this is all designed to send a pretty strong signal to EU leaders that they need to set aside their sovereignty concerns and get on with the job. As I say, now, Trump has made it clear that he views the EU as the front line against Russia. And in fact, he and Vance, in the recent weeks, but actually Vance going back 6 months or maybe even a year, have been making it clear on multiple occasions that they want the EU to take on this role against Russia so that the United States can focus on China. And also, by the way, they've expressed their expectation that Israel would be the core nation responsible for dealing with Iran for the same reason, because the United States wants to focus on China. And so, as we've already sort of mentioned a second ago, Zelensky and EU leaders have all run to London today to discuss what a European security guarantee would look like for Ukraine. So this whole thing is driving the EU together. It's driving the European Union defence policy forward. It remains to be seen whether or not it's enough to get it over the line, but this is a policy which has been in the works since 1984. It's often the case with the EU that it does take decades to get a policy done. But Matt, I'm seeing this as being potentially the thing that does get it done at the end of the day because of Trump's claim that he's withdrawing money from European defense, all at the same time that actually on the ground, the United States continues to build more bases in particularly Scandinavian countries, but in Greece as well. So I'm not quite so optimistic that actually this represents a serious effort to make peace with Russia. I think it is a serious effort to force the Europeans to take on that role
And
of being the opposition to Russia and to allow the United States to focus in other areas.
well, certainly that is a risk that we should not ignore, and this was something which Mario Draghi, I know, has been very loud about as well recently, and Zelensky, I think, on February 15th, did make an announcement as well, calling for this European army to be set up. But let me ask you this: I heard of an increasing amount of discussion around the idea of Arctic collaboration between the U.S. and Russia. And I know that there is Space Force bases in Greenland, which is always a shady thing. Obviously, your concerns about the repivoting towards an anti-China policy is a concern as well that I share. But have you heard anything about have you looked at the positive orientation towards a dialogue on Arctic cooperation between Russia and the USA that's been moving forward a little bit, or is that not really on the radar?
I haven't seen any positive dialogue about that at
No?
all. Quite the opposite. I've seen quite a lot of concern, particularly over the last 2 years, about the fact that Russia and China are doing so much to open up the Arctic. Russia and China are putting lots of effort into opening up that trade route along the northern
The Arctic Silk Road.
the,
Yeah.
the Arctic. Yeah, exactly. And so the Arctic has been something which appears in NATO press releases on a very regular basis in the last few years. And as I say, the United States has just done deals with Finland, with Sweden, with Norway to make more use of their military bases. They're building on those military bases, so they are establishing a presence in the Arctic that they've never had before, and that's all happening in the last 6 months.
That's true. Yeah. Well, do you think that there is the capability? I thought that the idea of getting the European countries to provide 5% of their GDP towards defense is something that would break the economies of these countries that they don't. But do you think that that's a viable that it's actually a foreseeable, viable, practical thing that this type of European army, with the economic disarray being what it is in Europe, is something which could still happen?
Well,
It doesn't seem like there's.
that is the big question. I mean, it's certainly not going to happen unless they run a deficit. But what Starmer announced was we're going to upgrade our defense spending by taking money out of the foreign aid budget. What this look the European countries, the United States, we all have pretty much the same problems in the sense that we don't have any money for defense actually. More than that, we don't have the personnel for defense actually, because
Yeah.
nobody wants to fight for BlackRock. And in fact, I was on a thing recently with Larry Wilkerson, and I was asking him exactly this question: was the United States having a problem recruiting? Because the United Kingdom is having a massive problem recruiting.
Yeah.
And he's saying absolutely, in any survey that he's been involved in, asking young people why they're not joining the military, the attitude is we're not going to die for BlackRock. And so there is an understanding amongst young people about what exactly is on offer with a military career at this stage with the current geopolitics that's going on.
Mm.
And so people are not joining militaries. And that's why we're seeing in the UK, in the EU, talk of conscription. And this policy is not something which is party political, because in the UK, the idea of conscription was well, first of all, it was launched by the joint by the defense chiefs, so it was coming from the defense personnel themselves. It was taken up by Rishi Sunak's Tory party government at the time, but this is something which is now being openly discussed again by Starmer's government. So this is not a party political policy. It is something that there's big pressure being brought to bear because recruitment is such a major problem for them at the moment. You know, the truth is, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was actually curious about Ed. I know you've got a lot of contacts up there in Russia and in Washington, Ed, and I'm curious what is. I'm sure you have a slightly different take on some of these elements. So, what are you seeing right now on the terrain in terms of the variables that Mike had just brought to bear? Do you see it as? I know you're generally a little bit more optimistic on some of these fronts.
Well, first of all, before I do that, I want to ask if what's about public mood in Britain on this situation? Do they really believe that Russians are going to attack Britain after they finish with Ukraine? Do they believe that?
I think that there is a proportion of the country that does not believe that, but the majority of them are absolutely falling for because it's not just coming from government. It's people are being bombarded with propaganda from the media, but also from voices like Farage and people that would be viewed as having a more populist position. So the number of voices that are sane are relatively few, but even when they're well recognized voices, they are being actively kept under the radar, shall we say. They're not getting any coverage. So I would say that the majority of people view Putin as being a dictator, someone who is a major threat, and someone that we've got to be arming ourselves against. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that is, for the general man in the street, probably the view that they take.
Yeah. Well, in Washington, according to the polls, more and more people, it's not that they necessarily like Putin, but they definitely don't believe that the US has to spend all this money on this kind of imaginable threat. And well, actually now, after what happened now, over 50% of Americans believe that we have to stop messing this, and because it will lead to the World War III. And hearing this from Trump, who was won with huge support of American public, even in places when Democrats have majority. So American public mood is moving more toward a reasonable position. Well, and after what happened on February 28, I think the numbers will definitely increase.
Yeah, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I would be delighted if people's view of this would change. I think that a good propaganda job was done on the majority of people, and actually similar to the COVID thing, when we were told we had to protect the National Health Service, and people were encouraged to come out of their homes on a Thursday evening at 7 p.m. and bang pots together in support of the doctors and the nurses. People for the last few years have been encouraged to fly Ukrainian flags, and we see this on advertising on buses. We see it everywhere, and lots of people have fallen for this hook, line, and sinker. So whether that changes, we do not have any one of the as straight talking as Trump is on this issue. Farage is still 100% anti-Russian, rabidly anti-Chinese, and so people that would be more open to accepting an alternative explanation for what's going on in the world aren't getting that on a broad basis. So it's relatively few voices that are sane in this country at the moment.
I'm surprised you mentioned several times Farage, because besides being a friend of Trump, Russia is known for saying that it was NATO expansion that forced Putin to start this invasion. And it looks like what you said, that Farage is actually leading the propaganda, anti-Russian propaganda. I,
I
uh,
wouldn't go as far as to say he's leading it, but he is certainly in agreement with the anti-Russian position as far as anything I've seen him say. And so I don't think it's fair to say that he's leading it necessarily or at all, but certainly not doing anything to oppose it.
hmm,
Well,
okay.
I've got I don't know if Come Carpentier has he made it on or not.
He's on the way
Nicholas.
to another hotel with better
Okay,
computer.
all right. Well, look, I know Gerald was it Gerald Pechnook? Yeah, Gerald Pechnook has been on listening, and he's with the Promethean Pack in the U.S. I know he'd like a word or two. So, Gerald, are you still there? If you are, you're on mute, but you have to take yourself off mute if you want to
Yes,
respond or share some
yes.
considerations.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you put your video on or no?
Yeah, I could put my video on.
I mean,
Sure.
not absolutely necessary, but
Uh,
whatever.
yeah, just the bandwidth sometimes
All right,
becomes
don't
a
worry about it.
problem.
No,
So,
just go for it.
okay. Yeah,
Share your thought, and
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, unbeknownst to probably most of the people on the call, unless you follow closely, and I wrote down a few things, so I'll just read them off real quick of what happened right before the uh, the showman showed up in D.C. Okay, February 22nd, so that's a little over a week ago. Caroline Levitt, press secretary, said negotiations with Russia are proceeding so expeditiously. President Trump is very confident the war could end with a ceasefire later this week. So that's one statement from the press secretary. A couple days later, February 24th, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was on Fox News. Quote, a deal ending the war in Ukraine could be imminent, quote unquote, imminent. Uh, During the White House conference with Macron later the day, Trump said he thinks the war could end within weeks. And on the day before Zelensky was there, the 27th, Trump said peace talks with Russia were, quote, very well advanced, implying that peace talks have been continuing in secret without fanfare. And of course, you had the meeting in Istanbul, which started off with the basis of the free Bojo appearance to talk Zelensky out of the signature. So it was the British back then, it's the British now. Lyndon LaRouche always said it is the British who want these wars, and you have it in spades right now. And I think what they're afraid of, very frankly, is if the US ain't in NATO and if there's no Article 5, that's what they're desperate to keep, And I think Trump is concerned about something called World War III. And I think there's some people in Britain who are Malthusians to the bone who actually don't give a rip about depopulation, and therefore, unlike us Americans who know very well, and I think Trump, as Ed will testify, wanted to participate in 2020 in the April 25th and the May 9th activities. And I think that's still uppermost in my mind and in Trump's mind that we should be at the 80th anniversary celebration. So that's my 2 cents, Matt.
Okay. Did we get any confirmation yet if Trump has said that he accepted or not Putin's offer to show up for the Victory Day celebrations? I know Xi Jinping did say yes. Did we
Well,
get any confirmation from the U.S. side?
no, we have no confirmation. I think we have Ed could probably know better, but probably we have, Trump would more or less do it, sort of make it look like spur of the moment or last second decision. But from what I remember in 2020, he definitely wanted to participate.
Right. And I know Ed has been organizing quite fervently as well for an Elba Day session as well, like an Elba Day event, which has been something that Ed's been managing for many, many years as a way to sort of rebuild that spirit of the Elba. So perhaps that sort of thing could contribute to that type of dialogue.
Yes, yes, this is it's still in the works, I think, behind the scenes. And there's a new Russian ambassador who is coming to Washington. He was just approved. He got
Yeah.
an agreement recently during the meeting, and I think he has to okay it. But the Washington Times, which is a voice, actually Trump's voice, they run my column, well, actually appeal for both of them to meet, and I get many positive responses. So maybe April 25 is more realistic than V-Day, but now with Xi Jinping agreeing, this will be a great thing for what we call Yalta 2.0. But within those 2 days, at this point, April 25, because it's really a meeting on the Elbow when Americans and Russians met and embraced, and this was a great day. It's celebrated every year, both in Washington and Moscow. And on April 25, 2020, when Trump was still president, both he and Putin issued a joint statement. And this statement was like a statement of allies, saying that we should remember Elder spirit when we were allies, and we continue to work toward eternal peace for both our nations and the world. It's all written. It's still, you can find it easily on the web. It's still posted, by the way, on the site of American Embassy in Moscow, a full statement. So we hope we still have some time.
Ed, it might be a great idea not just to get people to go look it up, because I did find it when I went to look it up, but to publish it as a new article, something that is unknown, but it's right there. It's like reality in front of your eyes, but you look the other way. And here we're going to give it right in front of your face, so you can't ignore it. I think that would be very appropriate on your part.
Okay, will do. Okay.
I was curious. I noticed that Hall Gardner is in the audience, and Professor Hall Gardner is somebody who has spoken at many of our roundtables. And if you're there, Hall, would you have any considerations or thoughts that you'd like to share of the strategic situation as you see it currently? If you're not necessarily,
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
I'm yeah. Thank you. I wasn't expecting that, but
are you in Paris? Are you in Paris?
I'm in Paris. I'm American in Paris.
Great. Because today is European Day, so we need Europeans.
I'm not really I'm an American in Paris, so I don't really fit. But I've been here 30-something years, so. I am concerned that we're really facing a major split between the U.S. and Europeans over this. I agree with the previous comments that, but I don't think it's Trump's goal. I mean, I think the Europeans are beginning to organize. I mean, if you look at it, before Trump, NATO's been telling the Europeans, Gates, before this Secretary of Defense, told the Europeans, get your act together and build a unified Europe, a unified defense structure. I mean, I myself argued that way back in 2000, that the Europeans need a more integrated and unified defense. But what I'm worried about is they're doing this at the last moment. And I don't think it's Trump's purpose. I think he really wants a U.S.-Russian deal, as he puts it. But he's creating a backlash among the Europeans that are going to strengthen their support, their military support for Ukraine. And I really don't think this is the way to go about it. I do think the Europeans need greater defense coordination. I do think they need to be ready for contingencies, but I do not think they should make it look like they're proposing a new militarization in support of Ukraine to counter Russia. So this is what's worrying me in this new defense alignment between UK, France, Germany, and Poland and Ukraine. They're really beginning to do things they should have done a long time ago. But as I said, I'm a bit worried it's going to backlash in breaking down, potentially breaking down the peace talks between the U.S. and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And I can even go further than that. I would even argue that if the U.S. and Europe do break apart, which I hope won't, Europe will be looking to China and India for new alliances, and that's been talked about for quite a while. So that idea of Europe looking to China in particular, and now India as well. So we could see, as before World War One, when Britain and Germany came closer together, tried to make a deal, France and Russia aligned against Germany. I'm warning, watch out. If this breaks up, Europe will look to China in forming a new, and with Ukraine, forming a new encircling alliance against Russia. And that was actually, there were articles about that even during the 1990s when Ukraine and Russia, 1991 and 1994, there was a Russian, I can't remember his name, warning that Ukraine could form an alliance with Europe and China way back when. So that's just projection, but these projections can become realities if the tensions between the U.S. and Europeans magnify. And that's why I think, from the American point of view, I think it's very important to work with the Europeans as we approach a peace in Ukraine and not try to alienate them or not really offend them in some of the ways they see themselves being offended. So I won't say.
Yeah, I don't know how
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if my mind can even conceptualize China breaking with its strategic alliance with Russia in favor of a Ukraine-European partnership. It's almost impossible for my mind to fathom how that could even unfold. But
You're right. You're right. China reconfirmed its strategic partnership just recently with Russia. But I'm looking at this from a historical perspective. It takes several years. I mean, and then, I'm just saying it really did happen in World War One when Germany tried to make a deal with Britain, and Britain tried to make a deal with Germany. I'm talking about in the 1890s, from 1890 to 1894. It took 4 years, and France formed an alliance against Germany from 1890 to 1894, and that Franco-Russian alliance was the alliance, in my view, that caused the World War. It wasn't Germany. It was the tightness of the Franco-Russian alliance, which couldn't be broken. Now,
yeah, and of course, yeah. Right, go on.
But you're right. If the Sino-Russian alliance can't be broken, then that's another problem for Trump, because one of the deals for Trump is to bring Russia and the United States together and at least weaken its alliance with China and Iran and North Korea. So Trump is looking for some way to loosen up the Russian Chinese alliance, and if that happens, then Europeans would fill in the gap. If that happened. Now, if it doesn't happen, which I hope it won't, then we can work towards peace. But I really think it has to be a collective effort, and real concerted effort, which means Trump does have to talk to the Europeans. He does have to talk to the Ukrainians, but he has to give the weight to the U.S.-Russian relationship as they move forward towards peace. And I don't want to see Europe militarizing because it fears that the United States is not going to support it at all. That's my main concern. That's why I'm saying the Europeans can shift to China or somewhere else if it's a complete break. That's why
I got you.
The U.S. has to continue to affirmed that it will support Europe. At the same time, it seeks a peace deal with Ukraine. It doesn't have to be peacekeepers from the European military, the NATO. It could be international peacekeepers. India. I mean, well, if you put Indian troops in there, why would Russia attack Indian troops if they're placed in the buffer zones between Russia and Ukraine? So that it has to be. In other words, you sort of have to think internationally. You can't just think between Russia and Ukraine if you want to end this. But if you just think in purely military terms, I'm a bit worried that what the Europeans are doing now will create new tensions, and not ones that Trump is looking for. That's where I differ from the earlier speaker. I don't think it's Trump looking for that.
Yeah, no. Before we go to Marty, who I know has a lot of thoughts that he'd like to share based on what's been said, that is a concern that I also have. That, I think Trump does want to make deals. I don't think he sees an economic opportunity in unleashing World War III. I think he's pragmatic in that sense as a person. However, based on the remarks of Kellogg at different times when he mentioned that one of the motives behind their relationship or their approach to Russian relations is to weaken Russia away from Iran and China and North Korea.
Yes.
That is a concern, and there does seem to be a variety of war hawks who do have some very, very malign intentions to pivot militarily against China, which is a very scary thing. That those are active agents within the foreign policy network around Trump. Again, I don't think that this is Trump, but that's a factor not to be ignored.
I agree. That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, good that thank you for sharing your scenario. It's valuable. And Marty, now I'm curious to see what you have to say about some of this stuff.
Thank you, Matt. Difficult for me to up here because the comments we've already had, starting with Mike himself, of course, have been hugely important, of the highest quality. And I think a key point here is that even when Mike and our other commentators and yourself appeared to disagree, or consciously thought they were disagreeing, they were making very valid points. It's like we're all feeling different parts of the elephant and trying to puzzle out what the overall picture of the elephant is. And I'm not going to have a final answer on that. And if I did, other people will rightly correct me afterwards. But it's important to see these different aspects of the same picture. The points I'd like to emphasize, first of all, are, first, I have no doubt personally, watching the way the administration has functioned so far, and in foreign policy, they know what they are doing and they are inflicting chaos, but when they inflict chaos, they do it deliberately. They are doing it deliberately. And there are also differences within it. But a bottom line is, in the first Trump administration, he kept Pompeo, an absolute ass, as his Secretary of State for most of his term. And Pompeo had this simplistic idea, which you have rightly pointed out, Matt, is absurd and is not going to happen, that somehow America could pivot from 30 years of stabbing Russia in the back and in the chest as well, and encouraging NATO expansion and breaking all the solemn what's the word, verbal and unfortunately unwritten guarantees that NATO would never expand to the east, that were given by both Presidents Reagan and by President George Herbert Walker Bush. And Pompeo and Trump then thought, all you have to do is say this to the Russians and they'll drop the Chinese immediately. And of course, the Russians did not. The Chinese did not. The Russia-China relationship now is, I think, very, very much, as Hall rightly described, the Russian-French relationship against Russia. That I fully agree with Hall's assessment. That was the driving key force that led us to World War I, and everything else was subsequent and subservient to it. This is crucially important to understand. First point. Second point, we see the same continuation here. Kellogg launched, with Trump's approval, gave a peace plan to Russia. It was absurd, and the Russians immediately rejected it. To his great credit, Secretary Rubio thought on his feet and in 1 week put together a different peace plan, whereas Kellogg, a lumbering fool, had taken literally 3 years to painstakingly put together his. But Rubio's plan did not work for a moment either, and the Russians, Lavrov, rejected that completely out of hand too. Trump and Rubio, I believe, are both well-meaning men in the most fundamental way. They both want peace with Russia. Rubio certainly still thinks you can separate Russia from China, and, Trump has always had that lingering view, but it's much stronger with Rubio. It's always been very explicit with Rubio that China is the great enemy, though he was carried along on the Ukraine issue too. But on Ukraine and Russia, Rubio definitely, and has shown very clearly he wants peace. This is not mere rhetoric. When he met Lavrov in Riyadh, they did not just say pleasant, polite things to each other, which would still be a vast improvement on all the things Blinken and Sullivan and Biden refused to say for 4 years. They set up, and this is crucially important, they set up procedures, as you know, Matt, for economic cooperation, to end the petty and disgusting harassment of Russian diplomats for the past 4 years since Biden took office in Washington. They are making seriously, they have set up, but Rubio understands how diplomacy is supposed to work. I didn't think he would, but he does. He is setting up correct principles of due process. He understands that with serious diplomacy, as Bismarck knew, as Franklin Roosevelt knew, as even Churchill knew in dealing with the United States and Stalin, you don't just wave a magic wand. You have to set up systems, you have to set up dialogues, you have to set up small areas where you can painstakingly build confidence, make progress, reduce tension. And this is the hard work of diplomacy. And what is so significant is Rubio has already committed the State Department to it. And this is something which no Secretary of State has understood in the past 20 years since General Colin Powell was forced out of office. For the past 20 years, we have had no Republican or Democratic Secretary of State who has understood this, including Trump's during his first term. Pompeo was incapable of it. So this is very positive and it's very important. Next point, possibly my last, I know I have a tendency, of course Mike will understand, I have a Northern Irish tendency to talk forever, which you do not, Mike, but I certainly do. Trump is absolutely right with his understanding of the Alta model. The last thing we need is a global peace conference, because we had a global peace conference that solved all the problems of the world, and it caused a world war, and it created genocidal hatreds across Europe and Asia immediately. And that was the 1919 Versailles Peace Conference. And the worst thing that happened there, one of the greatest sins of Woodrow Wilson and of David Lloyd George in Britain and of Winston Churchill, who played a much bigger role in that conference than he spent the next 20 years, 25 years, bending over backwards to rewrite his record. But the record is very clear. They empowered horrible little demagogues across Eastern Europe with mad dreams. And they did not create self-determination, because self-determination, as Hall well knows, is impossible in Europe and in pretty much every other part of the world as well, given the mix of different ethnicities. What did they create? They created a Poland that enslaved millions of Ukrainians. They created a Yugoslavia that enslaved all the South Slav peoples that were not Serbian, and that then hated the Serbian overlords for the next 80 years, infinitely more than they had ever hated the mild Habsburg overlords who had liberalized greatly over the previous 100 years. And they encouraged Venizelos, the Prime Minister of Greece, to launch a mad empire-building crusade into Turkey, which destroyed Greece instead of Turkey. And I think Trump is in danger of doing exactly the same thing by giving the Israelis a free hand to create an empire without limits in Syria, which is absolutely insane and utterly unsustainable. But they actually appear to be serious in doing it. So we have both creative and destructive chaos being unleashed from Washington at the same time. And it is crucial to understand this. My final point here is there is an enormous gap and between London and Washington on this. And it is a point that Gerald made in his chat message. I think a very crucial point you made, Gerald, that we are seeing this dying imperialism and this dying Atlanticism, this fake liberal idealism, which masquerades really for the enslavement, economic enslavement of the world that has come out of Wall Street, but even more out of London for so long. And there is a parallel here, and that is with Vienna in 1914. The Habsburg government was in panic about the Serbs. They knew the Serbian government, they were so incompetent they could not prove it, but they correctly suspected that the Serbian government was directly behind the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And Kaiser Wilhelm II rashly gave them a green light, a free hand, an okay, which Trump is perfectly capable of doing, and Biden had already done to the Europeans. And this unleashed World War I. It triggered everything into the catastrophe of 1914. But the key point, which goes back to what you were saying, Gerald, is we had in 1914 a panic-stricken imperial power going back 1,000 years in Vienna that knew it was dying, and this provoked it into panic-stricken overreactions. And this is exactly what the City of London and Starmer are doing right now. The 100-year treaty for guaranteeing Ukraine was insane. A day after Trump treats Zelensky like dirt and really humiliates Starmer. And he gives Starmer what he wants in the short term economically because he wants to leverage Starmer. Trump is basically well-meaning, and also he's transactional, economically transactional first. His preferred method is always economic leverage, both carrots and sticks. And he offered Starmer a carrot, which is, we will give you at least a little of the economic support which you desperately crave, and Britain will collapse without. But the unspoken corollary for that is play ball on Ukraine. They're not playing ball in Ukraine. And since they are close to the Ukrainian deep state, and they are very close to the survival of the president and the vice president, and for that matter, the Secretary of State. We were in a very alarming situation here. But the key point here, and I finish on this, is the split on Ukraine between Trump and Starmer is very, very real. Trump is clearly sincere, and rightly so, in making peace with Russia first, removing the threat of thermonuclear war, even when he has aggressive attitudes towards rare earths, which he doesn't even have access to in Ukraine. There are rare earths in Ukraine, but all of them are in the Russian ethnic provinces, which Russia is never going to give.
Yeah, no, super sorry about that. This hotel internet just is not reliable. But I did appreciate everything that I heard Marty say and all of the speakers so far. There was also a couple of people who were waiting to ask a question or share a comment. Bruce being the first name that I saw. Bruce, are you still there?
I am. There was a name before me, but
Oh yeah,
you
Bruce
look
and
for
then
that.
Ken, right, and then Elisa, and then we probably
Well, let's
will have
go
to
in.
wrap it up.
Let's
But
go
Bruce,
in
go for
order
it.
so you can keep track. No. Let's go in order. Who was first with a comment?
I don't know. I got hit by
Uh,
chaos, but I think was it Ken? No, Richard. Richard. That's it. Richard, are you there?
Okay. Well, I've been following all these developments very closely, and the sense I get is that the main priority for Trump right now, with respect to, is to simply normalize relations. He's walking away from Ukraine. He doesn't want to negotiate with Russia about Ukraine because he could only lose. Russia knows exactly what it wants. He's made it very clear. They're going to get all of their demands. So what Trump has done is set it up so that it's up to Ukraine and perhaps the Europeans to do the negotiating, and they're not going to get anywhere. So when in that is then going to lead eventually to getting rid of all the sanctions, giving Russia their money back. And there's not going to be, the reason he said 5% is because none of the nations can afford that. I mean, it's the end of. There's no need for NATO. It's going to go away. But right now, the Europeans don't have any sense of that because they're just in total shock, denial. Their whole world has been pulled out from underneath them.
Yes.
When reality sets in, we're not going to have any problem of NATO starting war. There's just not going to be any NATO because there's no need for it. Anyway, that's my view.
Okay. Bruce.
Someone said, "Oh, we're not going to fight for BlackRock. We're not going to enlist for BlackRock," and that's just one of the maybe global kind of understandings that are bubbling up. It's like, to what extent all countries have always been pawns of giant corporations. You know, I imagine there were roundtables like this pre-World War I and pre-World War II of people equally knowledgeable, just seeing the machinations driving for war, and we've got to be ready for that at any second. There are very smart people who think there are collapses that are imminent, and we've all got to be ready for those any second. But most hopefully, every time I sit on these roundtables, I just think this needs to go viral. There needs to be coordinated campaigns, putting my marketing hat on to spread the word about this. Should everyone here commit to bombarding Joe Rogan and saying, you've got to have who represents these roundtables best? Is it Edward? Is it Matt? And I looked just now at risingtidefoundation.net. I wish I could just quit everything else and just study everything on that site, Matt. But I was hoping to see, Peace Roundtables. So all of us could promote these roundtables with a single link
Right.
about this.
Right.
Finally, I put in the comments a little bit up a link to a recent conversation between Naomi Wolf and Catherine Austin Fitts, because just in the first 15 or 20 minutes, one of the great points they make, Naomi Wolf particularly as an experienced political consultant for decades, among many other things that she is, voluminous, fantastic author, politicians like Trump and leaders in whoever other countries are represented here need to be perpetually harassed by we who care about the particular issues, what we want them to do, so that when they're in their negotiating rooms with all these different forces, they can point to, I can't do that horrible thing because look at this pressure I'm under to do these good things. So maybe I'm stating the obvious. That's part of my observation, how rarely I hear anybody say, contact your congressman, contact your senator, bombard the White House. Is that because it's a given? Is everybody here constantly doing that anyway? Or is it worthwhile to highlight that? And what is anyone's opinion about that as effective? Let me put that question on the table, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, and that was one of the key drivers of what made the civil rights movement work, was organized, thoughtful letter writing campaigns and organizing the citizenry to take active responsibility instead of just, commenting in a voyeuristic fashion. So I couldn't agree with you more, Bruce. And I took to heart exactly your commentary. Cynthia and I were talking about that need to introduce these peace roundtables a little bit more obviously and in your face on the website with more instructions for citizens to take action. So duly noted. And yeah, we're going to internalize that and act accordingly. Just quickly here.
I just want to add to Bruce that we already said it several times that we're on the edge of really expanding our auditorium. And I just got another positive signal from Pluralia, they have tremendous opportunity to expand this not only to English speaking, but now they added also, they had Italian, Chinese, Russian, English, and now they're adding Arabian. And they're working very hard, the IT experts, to incorporate what we're doing now into this much larger audience, really. And they're running Eurasian Economic Forum, which I would say compete with Davos. So they asked me to be patient because they really want, apparently it's not such an easy IT technological process, they wanted to do it a perfect job. But just yesterday, I got notice that they are on the edge of finishing this, and maybe I don't know if next session or maybe after we'll have a huge audience. Hopefully, World War III doesn't start before that.
Right.
We have more powerful ways.
And that's the main site, Ed, you work through or publish through or promote this roundtable series on?
Well, yes, but it's my mailing list's about 10,000, which I promoted, but with Pluralia, it will be maybe 100 times larger.
Yeah.
So,
Excellent. And because I get emails from you because I'm linked into the communications of this roundtable, is that a site you're telling us to kind of hold off promoting, or should we take and run with it now?
well, first of all, you can go to Pluralia immediately. I think I already posted some of my articles on Pluralia. By the way, Marty also is publishing on Pluralia. So we can, and then you can read. It's a really a large number of Europeans, mostly Europeans, who are on the same wavelengths. And I will, after we finish this, I send again this link to Pluralia.
You'll put it in the You'll put it in the comments?
Yeah. No.
Because I just did pluralia.com and it says there's no domain I mean, the domain's available. Pluralia.
It's not pluralia.com. It's veronaforum.com. I will put it in the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
so
for anybody
much.
listening on YouTube, it's going to be in the description box under this video as well, pluralia.forumverona.com. So just check that out. Definitely, they host the annual Verona Forums promoting a multipolar, they're a multipolar world of cooperation as their primary focus. They're quite good. We have time for perhaps a couple of more comments, and I know Elisa and Hall have been waiting for a bit. Elisa, if you can make it relatively short, go for it.
I think the Trump MAGA people are missing an opportunity by not connecting with the Tommy Robinson group of the British people. And I can't tell if it's real or if Julian Assange or Tommy Robinson are just in jail for the fundraising opportunity.
No, I think Tommy Robinson is a controlled provocateur who's not to be trusted in any way. The MAGA group should stay the hell away from him. Mike, I don't know if you've got a thought on Tommy Robinson, Mike. I'd be curious to get your take.
Well, I mean, he is a Zionist and he's supported by Israel, so I think there's not much more needed to be said there. Okay. I mean, you know, when he starts plastering the internet with photographs of him sitting on an Israeli tank with an IDF T-shirt on, I think we don't need to know any more about him.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Hall.
I want to just say something so I don't sound like I contradict myself too much, but the real fear, in my view, is that Europe could break up. You know, I emphasize the fact of European coming together and militarizing, but there are so many forces that are leading Europe to go into different directions, with J.D. Vance supporting the AfD and the German extreme right-wing group, the right-wing parties in Britain have already broken Britain away from the European Union, and this is what really I'm really worried that what will happen out of this will be a new competition to control between Russia, China, United States to gobble up Europe if it can do that. If they can do that, and that's why it's very important for the Europeans to reassemble themselves, but not in a militarist fashion. So this is what I was trying to say. I wanted to make that clear, because the European Union is in real danger of cracking apart, and for legitimate reasons. There are reasons why people oppose the EU and criticize it, but it really needs significant reforms for it to kind of recenter itself and in fact humanize itself, democratize itself to a certain extent. So that's all I wanted to say. Just leave it there.
Actually, I got a quick question on that note. I mean, obviously there's the nasty pan-Europa, the fascist pan-Europa
Yep.
of Count Coudenhove-Kalergi idea that's been on the table, and that certain technocrats are still drooling for as sort of a gateway towards a post-nation state world order, centered around a non-elected bureaucracy of technocratic anti-humanists or misanthropes, I guess is one way to say it. But then, you do have a revival of a discussion around what is national sovereignty and the role of the nation state in shaping affairs outside of these types of globalist structures. Now, in the case of Europe, is there any viability of restoring an authentic nation state dynamic, or do we not see that having any workable vitality or vibrancy at this moment? I don't know. I'm just going to throw it out there as a question.
There's a European confederal model that's a possibility, but it needs coordination among the states, but it needs more popular participation in the governance structures, and that isn't happening in the European Union.
No,
in terms of, and so what I'm trying to say is it just really need to rethink the European Union in a way that allows it a more democratic format. Every European country itself is going through a debate on how to democratize themselves, and we've seen that in France and Italy in particular, and Germany as well. So I don't have an answer, but I will make some proposals in the next book.
All right.
I'm
very curious to see what you come up with.
Okay.
All right, cool. Bruce, yeah, one thought you got there. Go.
Does everyone know how to save the content in the chat? If not, if the chat's open as a column at the top, there are these three little dots. You click on it and it gives you a click option, Save Chat. Click it now. And then when you get out of this meeting, your folder in your computer should open, and there's the one file called Meeting Chat. Now you can put the date in it and then put it in any folder that you would like. I often do that.
Bruce, may I ask you where are you speaking from?
California.
Background looks like Arizona, something like that. It's California.
I'm in California. I wish that was my view.
No.
So what? Wrapping up?
Yeah, I think so. And I want to just say I appreciate what I like about these discussions is that we're all trying to formulate the best quality of hypothesis that we can possibly engage in. And I know that there's a lot of I get frustrated sometimes when I encounter the amount of certainty that a lot of people speak with in their voice, while the reality is many of the discussions and debates and fights that are happening that are shaping our future are happening behind the scenes. We're not privy to, and that's real politic, but we have to take our best educated understanding. So I appreciate so much, Mike Robinson, what you did at the beginning by looking at a variety of negative realities. These are facts that should not be ignored. We should take them into consideration, as well as the positive hypotheses as well that we encountered today. I think all of this has to be brought into our minds as we're learning how to generate our own best analysis of things and have, responsibility that we're not just watching a process, but we're living in a process. We are actors on the stage of history. And like Bruce said, and I appreciate so much, Bruce, your intervention as well to get us all to refocus on our personal sense of responsibility to the process that we're talking about. So we have a lot to work. We have a lot to do. I know next week we have Francesca, who did commit to getting back on board. And I have faith that she'll have recovered from her flu by then. And I got a few other ideas of some great speakers who can join us and to continue spreading the word, like Bruce said, and getting more people to come on board and to listen in and to reproduce these types of discussions about the big picture. And I noticed that Come Carpentier just entered the door, unfortunately, and I don't think we have time, Come. Or what do you say, Ed? What would you say to end it off with? Do you want to?
Give him 2 minutes. He tried. He left a wedding just to come here.
He did? Okay, then he has to speak. Okay, you left a wedding to come here, Combe.
Your final resume, you didn't hear what we were saying, but we were saying about split about America and Europe and what's going on. Please You have 5 minutes to somehow.
Thank you. And that's a very short time to say a lot, but I'll try my best. I'm sorry, I was in the middle of a wedding, and unfortunately, the connection didn't work, and I had to run back to the hotel where I finally found the right connection. Now, I want to say that what happened between Zelensky and Trump demonstrated that, in a way, Trump had been set up. Most people think Zelensky was set up, but clearly the Europeans had pushed Trump to receive Zelensky, which he didn't want to do. And the idea was to try to convince Trump, or to at least sort of shame him into giving up on his plan to making a quick peace with Russia, and therefore stopping the Ukraine war. And very clearly, the current European leadership is committed to a long-term war. Even Secretary Rubio said that when he had talked to the Europeans about the American peace plan and they had expressed their disagreement, he had told them, what is your alternative? They said, well, we have to keep the war going for at least a year, and hopefully by then Russia will be exhausted and will sue for peace. And clearly this has been the European agenda, particularly the French and the British and the French, I would say in that order. And therefore, the Zelensky visit was intended to explain to Trump that there could not be any settlement with Russia at this time, because, as you know, under the Ukrainian constitution, Zelensky cannot negotiate with Russia. So a negotiation with Russia involving him would essentially mean the end of his power. And at the same time, it would put an end to the old I would say, Atlantic dream of somehow humbling Russia and forcing Russia to change position and perhaps government. Now, this has obviously not worked, because it appears that Trump and the people who support him, both in America and abroad, have decided that the only way to bring this terrible conflict to an end is to make an agreement with Russia, which would have the additional benefit of enabling Trump to concentrate on what he perceives to be the Chinese economic and strategic threat. And clearly, the Europeans are now in a situation where they are openly talking about the end of the Atlantic Alliance. They are talking about the end of NATO. And even the presumed a new Chancellor of Germany, Merz, has said that West no longer has an American leader or leadership, and therefore a new leadership should be formed. And he has, for the first time, maybe not for the first time, but in Germany, it certainly is a relatively new view that there should be an independent European defense system, no more connected necessarily to the United States, at least as long as Trump is in power. So that supports what the French have been saying for a long time, namely that Europe should build its own system, defense system, and Macron has various times offered to provide the French nuclear umbrella for an independent defense of Europe. Now, we don't know where that will go, and it is very likely that NATO will gradually weaken and perhaps disintegrate if Trump is able to carry on with his agenda. But the question now is, what will happen to Ukraine and Russia? It seems to me that the Europeans will not be able to provide sufficient and necessary help militarily, even though Britain has made a commitment which is supposedly for 100 years. And they have signed, as you know, a 2.8 billion defense pact with Ukraine for this year. And I don't know where that will go, but it seems to be very difficult in the current British situation that they could essentially defy the United States and squarely go against the will of the White House. So at this point, I think the dream of a, if I might say so, the dream of a Ukrainian victory over Russia is fading for good, and Europe is facing responsibility for its actions, which means that there will be a dramatic reassessment of the European organization in terms of both NATO and the European Union. And we might see a rapid decline of the European Union, which has already begun. So I think in the time you have given me, this is what I could say.
Tom, thank you so much. First of all, I'm sorry we interrupted your wedding party, and so you really sacrificed for peace. But you missed at the beginning. We mentioned about that Europe demanded new leader of free world, and we showed a picture showing who is the new leader. We found this new leader of free world is Zelensky, and we showed this picture. So Europe has to be satisfied. Okay, well, thank you so much, and that was a great discussion today. And Matt, going to say something at the conclusion?
No, I think that wrapped it up very nicely, and I think you used your 5 minutes very, very well, very efficiently, Com. And I look forward to all of the great assessments in the weeks ahead. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll reconvene once more. I'll be in Thailand with Cynthia at that point, but I'm going to be very happy to continue this conversation. I'm very curious to see what the world gives us to talk about. I'm sure it's going to be interesting, to say the least. So thank you, everybody.
What country you were speaking from?
I am in India, but I'm in Chandigarh, which is a city built by Le Corbusier, and which is at the foothills of the Himalayas. And so I'm sorry also because I tried to make the connection, but when you are in somebody's house, things don't always work as you plan. So anyway, I am not far from Delhi, but it's still a very different place.
Okay, well, we covered a lot of part of the world. Yes, great. Thank you so much for being. And next thing is what? March 16, right? Hopefully by the time we'll have more good news.
You got it. And for anybody who wants to stay on for the next session, we're going to have Joaquin Flores speaking in about 1 hour under the Rising Tide Foundation. So email me if you'd like to be on for that geopolitical masterclass coming up in about an hour. Take care.
30 seconds, please. People are asking. They can't save the chat. I've said everything I can. It's those 3 dots often at the top, sometimes at the bottom of the column. Does anyone have 15 seconds of advice to tell anyone how to save the content of our chat? That's all I got. Those
I just
3
learned
dots.
No, I think that's the only thing I would know how to say is to repeat what you said. Otherwise, no idea.
Someone's asking, can someone save the chat and email it to us? I saved it, but I don't have everybody's email.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Google it, and you'll figure it out. I have faith in people's ingenuity. All right. Bye, everybody. Take care.